The figures staggered even those who had witnessed the mobilization firsthand. By spring 1945, the United States operated over 300,000 factories dedicated to war production, including approximately 200 purpose-built mega-facilities that dwarfed anything the industrial world had seen before. The Willow Run plant outside Detroit sprawled across 67 acres under a single roof, producing B-24 Liberator bombers at a peak rate of one aircraft every 63 minutes. Ford's River Rouge complex employed 93,000 workers across a site covering 2 square miles. The Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, had expanded from virtually nothing to 50,000 workers building Liberty ships in an average of 42 days each. Across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and California, these industrial Leviathans had transformed the American economy and landscape. Now, with surrender documents signed in both Europe and the Pacific, a question as massive as the factories themselves demanded answering. What would become of the greatest industrial capacity ever assembled? The immediate post-war situation presented a logistical puzzle of extraordinary complexity. These facilities had consumed approximately $40 billion in government investment, employed roughly 18 million workers at peak production, and occupied land equivalent to several large cities combined. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit covered 113 acres. Boeing's Seattle facilities had grown to include 75 buildings across multiple sites. The Dodge Chicago plant manufactured aircraft engines in a building with 4 million square feet of floor space. Glen Martin's Middle River facility near Baltimore employed 53,000 people. Each mega-factory represented not merely a building but an entire industrial ecosystem with dedicated railway sidings, power generation facilities, worker housing, and supply chains connecting thousands of component manufacturers. Shutting them down abruptly would create economic catastrophe. Operating them indefinitely was financially impossible. The challenge wasn't simply closing factories. It was unwinding the most extensive industrial mobilization in human history, without triggering depression or social upheaval. 3 fundamental questions drove post-war planning debates throughout 1945 and 1946. First, which facilities possessed conversion potential for civilian production versus those so specialized for military manufacturing they offered nothing else. Second, who would control the government-owned plants? Would they be sold to private industry, operated as public enterprises, or demolished entirely? Third, how rapidly could demobilization proceed without overwhelming labor markets already facing the return of 12 million servicemen? The War Production Board, established in 1942 to coordinate industrial mobilization, now faced the inverse challenge. Their surveys identified approximately 48 mega-factories with clear civilian application potential, 73 that might convert with substantial modification, and 81 whose specialized nature made conversion impractical or uneconomical. The decisions made in boardrooms and government offices during this period would reshape American industry for generations, determining which communities thrived and which withered, which corporations dominated post-war markets, and which faded into obscurity. The American government's approach evolved through 3 distinct phases, each reflecting changing economic priorities and political pressures. The initial phase, from May through December 1945, focused on orderly winding down of war contracts whilst maintaining employment levels. The War Department canceled approximately $70 billion in pending orders within weeks of Japan's surrender, but did so strategically to avoid overwhelming unemployment. Factories received termination notices with 90 to 120-day grace periods, allowing graduated workforce reductions. The Willow Run bomber plant, for instance, received its cancellation notice on August 18, 1945, but continued limited production through November whilst Ford negotiated the facility's future. This phase saw approximately 43,000 smaller war contractors close permanently. But the mega-factories received special attention due to their economic impact and conversion potential. The second phase, spanning 1946 through 1948, involved the massive disposal program of government-owned facilities. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, tasked with managing this unprecedented asset sale, cataloged industrial property valued at approximately. The challenge lay in determining actual market value when peacetime demand remained uncertain and potential buyers understood the government's urgency to sell. The RFC developed a tiered disposal strategy: priority facilities with clear civilian demand, automotive plants, basic steel production, chemical facilities went to competitive bidding. Specialized military factories faced three options: sale to defense contractors expecting continued military orders, conversion to other uses, or demolition with materials salvaged. The Dodge Chicago engine plant sold to General Motors for approximately $15 million, roughly 30% of its construction cost. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal transferred to government surplus for eventual sale at 42 cents per square foot, a fraction of building costs. Kaiser's Richmond Shipyards illustrated the complexities involved. At peak operation, the facility comprised 4 separate shipyards employing 90,000 workers, building 3 types of vessels simultaneously. Henry Kaiser advocated converting the yards to civilian shipbuilding, arguing that American commercial shipping needed modernization and the yard's innovative assembly line techniques would revolutionize merchant vessel construction. The Maritime Commission supported conversion, offering subsidies for commercial orders. However, established East Coast shipbuilders lobbied against what they characterized as unfair government-subsidized competition. Ultimately, political pressure prevailed. Richmond Yard No. 3 closed completely by December 1945. Yards 1 and 2 operated at drastically reduced capacity through 1946, then shut permanently. Yard 4 alone continued limited operations, primarily ship repair and modification work. By 1950, facilities that once launched 747 vessels employed fewer than 3,000 workers. The massive fabrication shops, cranes, and assemblyways were gradually dismantled for scrap, the metal sold to help satisfy post-war construction demand. The aircraft industry's megafactories faced particularly acute challenges. Wartime production peaked at approximately 96,000 aircraft in 1944, a figure that plummeted to roughly 35,000 in 1946 and below 10,000 by 1947. The Willow Run facility exemplified the conversion debate. Ford Motor Company had built the plant under government contract, operating it throughout the war before the government assumed direct ownership in 1943. Post-war, multiple futures seemed possible. Ford explored converting it to automobile production, but the plant's linear assembly configurations. Kaiser Fraser Corporation, a new automotive venture, eventually purchased Willow Run in 1945 for approximately $53 million, substantially below the facility's estimated $110 million construction cost. Kaiser Fraser produced automobiles there from 1947 through 1953 but never achieved profitable operations. The massive plant designed for single-purpose high-volume production proved inefficient for the automotive industry's model diversity and frequent retooling requirements. Boeing's Seattle facilities followed a different trajectory. Unlike Willow Run, Boeing owned its primary plants and retained complete control over conversion decisions. The company recognized immediately that commercial aviation would emerge as a major post-war industry, providing purpose for factories whose aircraft production. Boeing began designing the Model 377 Stratocruiser, a commercial transport derived from the B-29 Superfortress. Before war's end, the company retained approximately 23,000 employees, specifically for commercial aircraft development, absorbing the payroll burden, whilst military contracts evaporated. The strategic gamble succeeded. Succeeded. By 1947, Boeing had transitioned substantially to commercial production, with the Stratocruiser entering service and the revolutionary Model 77 jet airliner already in development. The Seattle megafactories, rather than closing or converting to unrelated production, found renewed purpose building commercial aircraft that would dominate global aviation for decades. The Glenn Martin Company faced bleaker prospects. Their Middle River, Maryland facility had employed 53,000 workers building B-26 Marauders and other military aircraft. Post-war, commercial aircraft orders failed to materialize in sufficient volume. Martin attempted diversification, pursuing commercial transport designs and even bus manufacturing contracts, but nothing provided adequate work for the massive facility. Employment dropped to 8,000 by 1948. Employment dropped to 8,000 by 1948. The company survived by securing military contracts for the emerging Cold War, particularly the B-61 Matador cruise missile program beginning in 1949, but never regained wartime employment levels. Large sections of the Middle River plant sat unused, the buildings maintained but empty, awaiting military orders that arrived sporadically rather than in the continuous volume that had justified such enormous capacity. The steel industry's megafactories experienced the smoothest conversion. Facilities like the Geneva Steel Plant in Utah, built by the government at a cost of approximately $200 million to supply Western steel demand, found ready civilian markets. Construction booms, automotive production recovery, and appliance manufacturing created sustained demand exceeding available capacity. Geneva Steel, operated by U.S. Steel under government contract during wartime, was purchased by the company in 1946 for approximately $47 million. The integrated mill employed approximately 5,000 workers producing steel plate, structural steel, and other products for civilian markets. Similar transitions occurred at government-built facilities in Fontana, California, and numerous expansion projects at existing steel centers. Steel's fundamental nature, a commodity material serving countless industries, made conversion straightforward compared to aircraft plants or munitions factories designed for single-purpose production. Chemical and synthetic materials facilities presented mixed outcomes. The massive synthetic rubber plants, built to replace Southeast Asian natural rubber supplies, lost their strategic imperative with peace and renewed rubber imports. The government had invested approximately $700 million constructing 51 synthetic rubber plants with annual capacity exceeding 700,000 tons. Post-war, natural rubber prices dropped substantially below synthetic production costs. Many plants faced immediate closure. However, technical advances during wartime had produced synthetic rubber with characteristics superior to natural rubber for specific applications, particularly tire manufacturing. The industry consolidated dramatically. Plants in Institute, West Virginia, Port Neches, Texas, and Louisville, Kentucky continued operation. Smaller facilities closed permanently, their specialized equipment scrapped. By 1950, American synthetic rubber capacity had decreased approximately 40% from wartime peaks, with remaining production concentrated in the most efficient facilities serving niche markets where synthetic materials offered performance advantages. Ammunition and explosives facilities faced the most definitive fate. Plants manufacturing artillery shells, small arms ammunition, bombs, and explosives offered virtually no civilian conversion potential. The government operated these through contractors rather than direct ownership in many cases, complicating disposal. The massive Indiana Army ammunition plant, covering approximately 12,000 acres and producing small arms ammunition at extraordinary volume, ceased production entirely in October 1945. The facility entered caretaker status, maintained at minimal expense against possible future need. Similar patterns repeated at ammunition plants across the nation. The Badger Army Ammunition Plant in Wisconsin, covering 7,000 acres and producing gunpowder and rocket propellant, entered dormant status by March 1946. These facilities represented enormous sunk costs, hundreds of millions in construction, but operated profitably only at wartime production volumes. Maintaining them empty cost far less than demolition, preserving potential reconstruction if future conflict required renewed production. Shipbuilding facilities beyond Kaiser's Richmond yards faced parallel challenges. The Bethlehem Fairfield Shipyard in Baltimore had employed 26,000 workers building Liberty ships. Post-war commercial shipping demand existed, but at nothing approaching wartime volume. The yard closed in 1946, its ways and cranes dismantled for scrap or sale to remaining active shipyards. The Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company's mobile facility, which employed 30,000 workers building cargo ships and support vessels, contracted to fewer than 5,000 employees by 1948, surviving primarily on ship repair work and occasional military contracts. New Orleans Higgins Industries, famous for landing craft production, employed 20,000 workers at peak, but fewer than 1,000 by 1948. Andrew Higgins had expanded dramatically, constructing multiple facilities and even purchasing aircraft plants for diversification. The collapse in military orders bankrupted the enterprise. His facilities were sold piecemeal, with most demolished for their land value rather than continued industrial use. Soviet observers studied American demobilization with intense interest, drawing conclusions that would influence their own industrial planning. Stalin reportedly expressed amazement that capitalist America could demobilize so rapidly without revolution, having assumed that removing millions from war employment would trigger the economic collapse Marxist theory predicted. Buchan. Instead, pent-up consumer demand, the GI Bill's educational provisions, and rapid conversion of some mega-factories to civilian production absorbed most returning servicemen within 2 years. The Soviet Union drew different lessons from wartime mobilization, maintaining enormous military production capacity throughout the Cold War rather than attempting conversion and risking the social disruption they anticipated would accompany demobilization. British observers reached different conclusions. Having witnessed their own wartime factory expansion and painful post-war adjustment, British industrial planners envied America's ability to absorb capacity reductions through domestic market size. Britain's smaller economy and continued austerity meant many British shadow factories, built for wartime production, remained in government hands, operating as publicly owned enterprises producing commercial goods. The American model: rapid privatization, market-driven conversion decisions, acceptance of facility closures where conversion proved uneconomical, seemed viable only for an economy of America's continental scale. Preservation of industrial heritage received virtually no consideration during the immediate post-war period. The megafactories represented recent construction, not history worthy of conservation. When facilities closed, demolition proceeded based purely on economic calculation. Could the land generate more value for other uses? Did scrap metal prices justify dismantling buildings for materials? Only facilities with continued industrial purpose survived. No one in 1946 imagined that Willow Run or the Kaiser Shipyards might eventually merit historical preservation. The focus remained forward, converting to peacetime production, housing returning servicemen, building the suburbs and consumer economy that would characterize post-war America. Industrial tourism and heritage preservation emerged decades later, by which time most mega factories had vanished or been so extensively modified that their wartime configuration became unrecognizable. A handful of facilities survived substantially intact, preserved by continued use rather than conscious conservation. The Ford River Rouge complex remains operational today, producing F-150 trucks in facilities that once built tanks and engines for B-24 bombers. Portions of the Boeing Seattle facilities continue manufacturing commercial aircraft in buildings dating to wartime expansion. The former Chrysler Tank Arsenal, after various post-war uses including automotive production, now operates as a shopping center with careful renovation, preserving the facility's exterior whilst completely transforming the interior. Geneva Steel operated until 2002, when it closed due to foreign competition and changing steel markets. The site was subsequently demolished, eliminating one of the few remaining integrated steel mills built during wartime mobilization. Very few mega-factories survive in condition permitting understanding of their wartime appearance and operation. The Willow Run facility faced demolition threats repeatedly as Kaiser Frazer, then General Motors, then various subsequent owners found the enormous building increasingly obsolete for modern manufacturing. A portion of the plant survived until 2014, when the Yankee Air Museum successfully preserved a small section, relocating it to permit runway expansion at the adjacent airport. This fragment, approximately 144 feet of the original building, represents the sole preserved portion of a facility that once stretched 3,000 feet. The Richmond shipyards vanished entirely, the land redeveloped for housing, commercial use, and a national park commemorating Rosie the Riveter and wartime homefront contributions, but containing no surviving shipyard infrastructure. The legacy of America's wartime megafactories extends beyond their physical remains or disappearance. The manufacturing techniques pioneered, assembly line methods applied to complex products, statistical quality control, just-in-time component delivery became standard industrial practice worldwide. The workforce transformations, particularly women's factory employment and African American migration to industrial centers seeking war work, produced social changes outlasting the factories themselves. The government's willingness to finance enormous industrial facilities demonstrated state capacity for economic mobilization, establishing precedents invoked during subsequent crises. The rapid demobilization, despite predictions of economic catastrophe, demonstrated capitalism's adaptability, though success depended on unique circumstances. Accumulated consumer demand, technological innovation enabling new industries, and America's industrial competitors lying in ruins. Current understanding of these facilities' fate remains incomplete. Corporate records documenting conversion decisions often were discarded as businesses focused forward rather than preserving history. Government disposal records exist but emphasize financial transactions rather than industrial or social dimensions. Academic historians largely overlooked industrial demobilization, focusing on diplomatic history, military affairs, or social transformations whilst treating factory closures as mere background. Recent scholarship has begun addressing these gaps, but documentation challenges persist. Tracking individual facilities requires piecing together corporate archives, government records, local newspapers, and worker testimonies, a laborious process that remains incomplete for many mega-factories. What survives today offers fragmentary evidence of wartime industrial mobilization scale. The Yankee Air Museum's Willow Run fragment preserves one tiny piece of bomber production history. The Richmond Shipyard Area's National Park commemorates workers but contains no shipyard remains. River Rouge continues operating but has been rebuilt repeatedly, erasing wartime configuration. Most megafactories exist only in photographs, blueprints, and fading memories. The generation who built tanks, ships, aircraft, and ammunition in these facilities has largely passed. Their workplaces, the physical settings of greatest generation mythology, have nearly all vanished, demolished, or transformed beyond recognition. The contrast between wartime construction speed and post-war erasure remains striking. America built 300,000 war production facilities, including 200 megafactories in under 4 years. Within a decade of war's end, the majority had closed permanently, many demolished. Others converted so extensively their wartime purpose became unrecognizable. The industrial landscape transformation happened faster than the mobilization itself. This wasn't destruction in the military sense. Cities weren't bombed, facilities weren't systematically eliminated, but market forces and policy decisions achieved similar results. The economic incentives favoring new construction over adaptation meant preserving megafactories required compelling reasons most lacked. Steel commanded higher value as scrap than as deteriorating buildings. Land generated more revenue as housing developments than abandoned factories. The megafactory's disappearance reveals how quickly even massive physical infrastructure can vanish when economic purpose evaporates. These weren't ancient ruins succumbing to centuries of neglect, but modern industrial facilities eliminated within years or decades of construction. Their fate challenges assumptions about infrastructure permanence and raises questions about what from our present era will survive for future historians to study. The digital economy's infrastructure might prove even more ephemeral than the megafactories. At least Willow Run left photographs and a preserved fragment. What physical evidence will remain of server farms, fulfillment centers, or data networks once their economic purpose passes?